of the problems that we're facing after the flooding and some of the problems that government has in getting, sometimes it seems, anything done. There are various suggestions about how we can improve our situation. One of the suggestions is that there be a grand coalition of parties, a sort of big coalition to try and improve governance. Remember what happened after 1994, for example. That would mean the bigger parties would be part of a coalition to try and govern the country. In real terms, it would probably mean this would be a coalition at least between the ANC and the DA. Someone who's now making the suggestion formally is Richard Jurgens. He's the editor of the Africa Governance Papers at Good Governance Africa. Richard, it's good to talk to you again. We tried yesterday. Eskom got in the way. Let's see if we can continue today. Let's start at the beginning. What exactly are you proposing here?
Well, I think the first point to make is that it's clear that the ANC's performance since at least the 1990s has been poor, not to say disastrous. And we saw the results of that in the last local elections in 2021 when, for the first time, the ANC's national support declined to less than 50%. If you look at the figures, both at local level and at national level, the ANC's support has been consistently declining. I think that's an indication of fundamental disappointment in the electorate as regards its performance. And of course, the cutting edge of government is local government. And Good Governance Africa's GPI, Government Performance Index, has rated the municipalities and found that the top 10 contain mostly DA municipalities, and certainly the bottom 10 mostly ANC municipalities, and most of the municipalities in between run by the ANC or coalitions in some cases. I mean, it's worth pointing out some basic facts about municipality service delivery. In a quarter of municipalities, 95% of less than a quarter of municipalities, 95% of households have access to electricity, and about half of municipalities, most households don't have weekly refuse removal, and only in a quarter of municipalities do 50% of households have access to piped water. So these are clear indications of a really poor performance in government at the cutting edge. So it's time, I think, for us to discuss a new dispensation as to how the country is managed, which is essentially what it's about.
In real terms, are you just talking about a DA and ANC coalition? The EFF, for example, the IFP, they wouldn't be part of it?
Well, I think that would have to be decided between the parties. It's hard to predict that, but obviously the ruling party and the opposition party would be the most likely candidates for a grand coalition, or as we call it, a super coalition. And our argument for that is quite simply that coalitions of this kind aren't only a solution to emergency problems. They're structural in the politics of many countries for reasons that have basically to do with societal, with pluralists, the fact of pluralist societies. They're to be found in Austria, the Czech Republic, Estonia, Germany, Iceland, Israel, Italy, Japan, to name some countries, the Netherlands and Switzerland. And the basic point about these coalitions is to address the issue of a pluralist society. And we're arguing that essentially that's one of the issues we're facing here. It's not so much a black-white divide, or so much as a privileged and underprivileged divide, and also a fundamental divide in political ideas as to how to solve the problems that we have and also how to manage the country going forward.
Okay, so in other words, what you want to do is avoid what, for argument's sake, happened in Nelson Mandela Bay, where you had complete chaos and governance really went down.
Absolutely. I think that, you know, what the local elections of last year showed was that there is more interest in coalitions at that level, and I think they indicate a changing perception in the country about coalitions and their viability, and certainly perhaps also at the, well, not certainly, but probably also at the national level, and it certainly would be a more viable approach than the one we've had now. The crucial point is to establish the idea of coalitions as a structural element in politics and not merely as an emergency solution. I think that would change perceptions of why coalitions are necessary and how they work.
So, I mean, I hear the argument, and I mean, I think in a way there's a lot to it. I wonder if maybe there's another problem that might be a little difficult for what you're suggesting, which is that I think one of the problems we may have is that the ANC is actually a collection of different political parties pretending to be one party. What I mean is, you have factional fights. I mean, if you go to where you see the worst possible governance, some of that is in Northwest, where factionalism in the ANC has been at its worst. Right now in Mangaung, for example, very bad governance in the Mangaung Metro. Again, two factions. I mean, I can bring other examples. So if you had to then bring a coalition, what you would really be doing is having 2 or 3 factions plus a sort of DA faction. I don't know if that would really solve the problem. I wonder if the problem, I mean, I think you diagnosed the problem accurately. I think it's a solution worth discussing. But I wonder if what you're suggesting takes into account what is really the factional problem within the ANC.
That's a very interesting point, Stephen, and I think it does need to be addressed. I think probably one of the best arguments for a coalition would be that it would focus minds at the coalition table on each party presenting a focused argument and a focused approach to its own policies. And so to some extent, I think that actually a coalition approach would help to focus the ANC's mind on representing itself as one party.
It'd be very interesting. I mean, maybe it'll force all the factions together if they've got to deal with the DA group of people with them. The other issue is that in many democracies, and I hate the fact that this has happened in democracies, but it's happened in many places, that people use wedge issues to try and win elections. So, and you see this all the time, and maybe the best summation on this actually came from the American President, Barack Obama, at the time, when he said that the Republicans are using 3 issues to win votes because they force division in that society. He said the 3 issues were God, gays, and guns. Now, I think that's beginning to happen in our society too. Not on those issues, but people try and deliberately divide us because that wins votes. When that happens, doesn't it make it harder to form coalitions? I could argue against my question and say that having a coalition makes what I'm talking about, that deliberate division, less likely.
Yeah, no, you put the points on both sides very well, Stephen. I think I would reiterate again that having the structural coalition approach would help to focus minds, in my opinion. It does work in other countries. It certainly does work in a country like the Netherlands, for instance, and in Switzerland even more, where it's absolutely a required element of government. The reason being that Switzerland is essentially a polity involving 4 language groups and many different micro-democracies. So to answer your question, I think, yes, a coalition in broad terms, a coalition approach in broad terms would really help to focus minds. It's important to understand why this is necessary in South Africa at the time. As I started off saying, the ANC has shown a distinct lack of ability to govern effectively, one might even say at many levels, and direct incompetence. And there are many reasons for that, but most of them have to do with the governments, with the ANC's internal governance. So our view is that by creating a coalition, you focus minds on the actual strongest arguments on both sides, and you also require a compromise approach to addressing the problems that the coalition is supposed to address. The important thing here is compromise, active, constructive compromise. We need a much more constructive approach to politics in this country at the moment. And as you were saying, the approach, the divisive approach that is becoming so common in democracies my answer to that would be that it can be effectively addressed by having a structural coalition approach.
Is John Steenhuisen going to be our next deputy president, Richard?
Who knows? I actually think it would, some kind of solution like that would actually be an effective solution to many of our problems. I don't know whether Steenhuisen himself would be, but whoever would be from another party, as long as they had constructive policies to offer, it would offer a much more constructive approach to managing the country. We must remember that the issue is fundamentally about managing our problems, and I think that a lot of the, certainly a lot of the politicians have got involved in strictly political fights, and they remember that a lot, and they forget that a lot of politics is also about technical, professional issues that require technical and professional solutions.
Might solve a couple of problems for President Ramaphosa to have John Steenhuisen as his deputy president. I say, being mischievous. You don't have to respond to that. Richard Jurgens, thanks very much indeed. I do appreciate it. He's the editor of the Africa Governance Papers at Good Governance Africa.